As far as the intelligence that developed, we are being told by sources that it was a mix of both local tips and intelligence developed by the community.
We're looking at live pictures while you speak, Brett, in Baghdad as people are getting this information. Do we know how many people were around him at the time? Do we know anything about the situation outside of that hole?
Yeah, there were 2 other Iraqis who were taken into custody. General Sanchez did not talk about who they were. He did not have a positive ID. But as far as we know from our sources at the Pentagon, it was not a large security detail. It was just a few people, and 2 others were taken into custody. This farmhouse, and we should point out this village, Adouar, is very small. It's about 8 miles south of Tikrit, and it is a place that had been searched before, actually. Now, we had heard multiple times from the U.S. commander on the ground there of the 4th Infantry Division, Major General Ray Odierno, that his people believed Saddam Hussein was still in that AOR, area of responsibility. They still believed all throughout this, and we've been reporting this for weeks, that he was in that vicinity. At one point, they had locals telling them that they thought Saddam was moving place to place about every 3 hours. This farmhouse was in a remote rural village, and again, 8 miles south of Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown, and he was found in a hole in the dirt that was designed for a hiding place with an exhaust fan. Again, not one shot fired in this raid. Not a single shot. They moved in. The special ops troops, were told, moved in first to this farmhouse area, and then they set up a cordon when they didn't find him in those 2 target areas where they thought he would be. They set up essentially a cordon around that entire village with 600 U.S. soldiers, and special ops soldiers then found the small hole, they called a spider hole, in which Saddam Hussein was hiding.
Fascinating. Brett, thanks very much. For viewers who may just be joining us, Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez spoke in depth about what all of this means. I want to play just a snippet of that for you now.
We now have final resolution. Saddam Hussein will never return to a position of power from which he can punish, terrorize, intimidate, and exploit the Iraqi people as he did for more than 35 years. The chapter of Iraq's history that was filled with Saddam Hussein's reign of terror is now closed forever.
So they've certainly talked about this eventual happening at great length. Brett, is it your sense that there is a belief now, whether they'll talk about it today and they wouldn't, but that there's a belief that these attacks will calm down and that people will return to a much more manageable lifestyle there as a result?
Well, Shep, they're very encouraged, obviously. This is a big day, but I talked to a number of officials at the Pentagon who said that while they're extremely happy with this development, they are also measuring their response. Today, there was a car bomb that went off at a police station in Chaldea, killing 17, wounding dozens. The terrorist attacks are believed to be continuing, and whether this has the effect of slowing things down or not, obviously is yet to be seen. It's tough to imagine that Saddam Hussein was running the campaign against U.S. forces, coalition forces, from that farmhouse. Some people speculate that he may have had a connection with a number of different people, including Ibrahim al-Doure, the number 2 man now most wanted in Iraq, since the number 1 man is now in custody. They believe that he had some contact with Saddam Hussein and maybe behind some of this terrorist activity. You also know that, and we have been told that Saddam Hussein was found with $750,000 US. Whether that was being used in any way to fund terrorist attacks, yet to be seen. In that farmhouse, also 2 AK-47s and about 100 different pieces of military equipment as far as hand grenades and that sort of thing around that farmhouse. We are hearing that the money was in this particular spot, one of the target spots, again, called Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2.
Brett, what do we know about communications? Did he have cell phones? Did he have a way to talk to those outside that hole?
We don't know. We don't know. Working the phones on that. The speculation is that one of the tips may have been a communication that was made from that specific area that was intercepted, but that's not confirmed as of yet.
Brett, thanks. Immediately after this came out, among the first messages certainly was for the Iraqi people. Paul Bremer spoke about that. Listen.
This is a great day in Iraq's history. For decades, hundreds of thousands of you suffered at the hands of this cruel man. For decades, Saddam Hussein divided you citizens against each other. For decades, he threatened and attacked your neighbors. Those days are over forever.
And there you go, the first message for the Iraqi people. And this happened in the middle of the day, certainly broadcast all over the Arab world and inside Baghdad. And these are live pictures in Baghdad right now, very near the spot where the statue came down. It appears, at least on first glance. Brett, from this point, we've been given very little information, obviously, about what happens next with Saddam Hussein and the way they will handle this. I know it's something that's been discussed at great length about the possibilities of how to handle such a thing. Can you go through some of that with us?
Sure. Lieutenant General Sanchez said that decision has not been made as to what happens with Saddam Hussein next. Currently, he's in U.S. custody, obviously, and he is being held under tight security. At what point he gets transferred over for that trial, you'll remember that the Iraqi Governing Council set up a tribunal just this past week to try former regime members with the specific indication, specific hope to try Saddam Hussein. They had determined that they were going to try him in absentia. That obviously is not the case anymore. They have
condition of him, which we are told is quite good right now, just tired, and also from the words of General Sanchez, a man resigned to his fate. And moments ago, we saw that news conference there with the Iraqi journalists celebrating as they saw this video of Saddam Hussein in capture. And more celebration here in the streets of Baghdad from the people of Iraq, waving flags, honking horns, and of course the traditional celebrations also often involve gunshots being shot into the air. AK-47s, we have heard many shots fired into the air. It is something we have seen before, but not quite like this. Wolf Blitzer joining me now in Washington, D.C. Wolf.
Thanks very much, Heidi. The U.S. military acted on what is being described as actionable intelligence. Clearly a sophisticated operation. There have been many of these in the past. This one was dubbed Operation Red Dawn. Our senior Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre, is joining us on the phone. About 600 troops, Jamie, we're told, got involved. The actual capture occurred at 8:30 p.m. Saturday time, local time in Iraq. That would be Saturday about 12:30 p.m., just after noon, here on the east coast of the United States. Pretty amazing that they kept this pretty much secret for so many hours.
Yes, they did, and it is pretty amazing. And as I was calling around as this news began to break this morning and talking to U.S. officials, I was catching them at home at 4 o'clock in the morning. And was finding that they were surprisingly well informed on what was going on. I thought at the time that was perhaps because of briefings they were getting overnight, but now it's obvious that this information had come back to Washington the day before. But even then, they were urging caution as they wanted to make sure that there was no premature announcement of the capture of Saddam Hussein, that all of the checks had been taken care of to make sure it was him. We, of course, saw the pictures, and it clearly looks like him, particularly the picture they showed where they showed the what he looked like with his beard and afterwards. And here, again, we see the tiny hole that he was hiding in. Now, this hole was camouflaged with bricks and made to look like it was just part of a wall. It's really a credit to the U.S. military that they conducted such a thorough search. You know, they went to these two locations. They didn't find Saddam Hussein, as has happened with many raids in the past, but they cordoned off the entire area and were very methodical in how they went through it, and that's how they discovered him hiding in the hole. And you can see from the videotape that he has grown a beard, and he did not offer any resistance. In fact, this whole operation went off without a shot being fired, which is amazing in itself when you consider how it ended when the United States went after his two sons, Uday and Qusay. They died in a very a bloody gunfight, firefight that went on for quite some time. But Saddam Hussein resigned to his fate, as General Sanchez said, and this is, of course, how the U.S. military is planning to convince the Iraqi people, is showing these very pictures here of Saddam Hussein, and then showing, of course, what he looks like after they've shaved his beard, and he very clearly looks like himself, if I may say. And the other interesting thing about this is that the U.S. has been getting better and better intelligence. They've been saying that for weeks. While they've always felt the noose was closing on Saddam Hussein, they've been getting more and more intelligence, narrowing down the places he could go. They really felt the noose was tightening. They tried to resist saying in public that they were closing in on him because they know it's a very difficult thing. You don't have them until you have them. But Wolf, today, they have them.
The ace of spades clearly has folded. I think it's fair to say that. Jamie McIntyre, I'm going to ask you to stand by, gather some more information. The details, of course, are fascinating. Let's bring in a member of the United States Congress right now. C.A. Dutch Ruppersberger is a member of the House Intelligence Committee, obviously well briefed on what happens in Iraq. Is this the way, Congressman, you thought this would go down?
Well, to begin with, it's a great day for the United States. It's a great day for our troops. What's so important is that intelligence will, in the end, help us get to where we need to be in Iraq.
Congressman, as you take a look at what happens next in this process, there must be all sorts of scenarios. The Pentagon, the U.S. intelligence community, the CIA, which you oversee as a member of the Intelligence Committee, they have all sorts of contingency plans, what to do next. What do they do next now that they have Saddam Hussein?
Well, to begin with, they have to go further. There's going to be the insurgency that's out there. We're going to have to be very aggressive as far as going after that insurgency, that group of the House of Cards. Secondly, we have to make sure that we start debriefing as many people as we can, because getting the intelligence now, the fact that Saddam Hussein has been captured, I think will open the door for a lot more of intelligence. But what this shows also is the perseverance of the United States of America. And I think this helps us throughout the world, that we're tenacious, that we're moving forward, and that we will reach our goal of bringing a democracy to Iraq.
Congressman, one final question before I let you go. The fact that he's cooperating now, talking Saddam Hussein, the search for weapons of mass destruction, they've been very elusive, as you well know, until now. You're a member of the intelligence community. Presumably, if anyone knows where those weapons of mass destruction are, if there are weapons of mass destruction, it would be Saddam Hussein. How important potentially is this capture?
1st Brigade Combat Team of the 4th Infantry Division went into this area. They had 2 specific targets. They did not find him in there. They then searched the area and found this small hole. They looked down in there. It was 6 to 7 feet deep. In there was Saddam Hussein, a hole with an exhaust pipe so he could breathe. They pulled him out. He did not put up any resistance. No shots were fired, and he is now in U.S. custody. A huge day around the world, but especially in Baghdad. David Piper, what's happening?
Those pictures of Saddam in custody were actually beamed right across Iraq at that time. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of feedback at the moment, but let me tell you that those pictures did come across, and we actually saw that hole that we were told was actually digging himself into as the special forces came into the basement of that farmhouse. But actually, the rumor of Saddam being captured came about an hour earlier. There was gunfire behind me, celebratory gunfire in reaction, and we've also been told of some big celebrations up in Kirkuk, which is the Kurdish heartland.
Of Tikrit, the military base in Tikrit. This was the first real good indication that CNN correspondents had that something important had happened. Troops in the 4th ID came back. They were taking pictures of one another. They were clearly in a celebratory mood. That's what these pictures are. And that was the first best indication that we had that something major had happened, and as it turns out, it is about as major as it can get. The ramifications of this, what this will mean for the resistance, what this will mean for the security of American forces, what this will mean for the future of Iraqis, are questions that are hard to answer today, but certainly questions that we'll spend a considerable amount of time working through as this day goes on. Retired General Don Shepard, Air Force General Don Shepard, who is familiar to many of you for helping us with analysis of the war, the build-up to the war, and the events after the war, is on the phone with us this morning. He's in Tucson, Arizona. He has some familiarity, General, with the leader of this operation, this 600-man operation that led to the capture of Saddam Hussein yesterday in Iraq. Good morning.
Yeah, morning, Aaron. Yeah, it's played out exactly as predicted. I was there about 6 weeks ago on a trip, and we're talking to Major General Raymond Odierno, who is the commander of the 4th Infantry Division in Tikrit, the man really in charge of the hot area there and the essence, if you will, of this search for Saddam. I asked him directly, look, do you believe he's still alive? Do you believe he's still in Iraq? He said, I believe he's alive. I believe he's in Iraq. I believe he's near here. I believe we've come close to him, and I believe we will get him. And that's exactly the way it played out. I don't know if it was through intelligence and tips or if it was through hard search, but he believed they'd catch him at a roadblock. He says he's got to be on the move. He's protected by his family, but he says we're going to get him, and that looks like the way it's played out, Aaron.
Are you surprised at all at the way it played out, in the sense that no shots were fired, that he was described as resigned to his fate when he was captured? There was no resistance, personal or otherwise?
I am indeed. I thought he would put up a fight to the end. He would be well protected. As it played out, it sounds like there were 3 guys in a hole in the backyard of a small farm. Now, one thing he had to be careful of was being surrounded by a great big entourage that would give him away, so there weren't evidently many protection forces around him. But they've been looking and eliminating areas for a long time and really zeroing in. So again, it looks like that their intelligence played out here. It's a great day. I believe it will make a great difference in the insurgency immediately. I think there'll be some more attacks. I think one other thing we have to be aware of is there could be retaliation attack in the United States by Al-Qaeda on this. So we have to be careful about that and mindful of it.
I want to pursue that thought for a second. Viewers who may not have seen the news conference a short time ago, if you're wondering what it is that is going on when those pictures are shown, those are Iraqi journalists who were in the room, who stand up, who cheer when these pictures of Saddam Hussein were being shown at the news conference. These are reporters for Iraqi media. Obviously, Iraqi media is quite a bit different than it was 7 months ago when the regime was in power, and they made no bones about their feelings. Don, on this question that you put out on the table, there may be a big difference between the long-term impact of this, which we'll see whether it leads to a weakening of the resistance or not, and the short term, which could mean retaliation against U.S. forces in Iraq, or, as you suggested, the possibility, it's only a possibility, that Al-Qaeda or some other terrorist group might try and launch some sort of operation here in the United States. In Iraq itself, would you imagine that the military is now on a very heightened state of security, anticipating whatever reaction from Saddam loyalists might take place?
Indeed. I'm sure the commanders there are telling their troops, look, this is not the end. This may be the beginning of a very dangerous period. I think the troops are going to be on super alert, because I think a lot of the Fedayeen Saddam will strike out in anger. I also think that Izzat Ibrahim al-Duri, the number 2 man, is still running around the country with money and probably will make a final attempt. So I think it'll be a very dangerous time that they'll be watching for and reacting to. We could see a lot of attacks in the short run here.
Don, thank you very much. Lieutenant General Don Shepard with us on the phone from Tucson on the subject of money. I heard as I was coming in this morning, we'll double check this, that Saddam, or at least where he was located, there was about $750,000 of U.S. currency found. It has always been said that he had not millions but billions of dollars, that some of this money was feeding the resistance, paying the insurgents to carry out the attacks on Americans and others. And there was an attack in Iraq, quite a deadly attack in Iraq today, and we'll have more on that as we go this morning. But 10 Iraqis killed, more than 20 wounded in a suicide bombing. So it's already been a nasty day there. On the other hand, as you can see by the scenes that you're looking at in what is surely the most famous square to American viewers in Iraq, there is some celebrating going on. But again, Jane Arraf, who is our longtime Baghdad bureau chief, is with us, has been there before the war and now after. Jane, in the absence of a wide shot, which we don't have to see, in fact, how many people are on the street, we see groupings of people. Is it a citywide celebration? Are the streets packed with people, or is it something else?
Aaron, it's probably small pockets of celebration. And one thing we have to remember is that even though there is now what a lot of Iraqis have to believe is categorical proof that he has captured, people are still going to be afraid. For one thing, they're going to be afraid of this gunfire. There has been gunfire behind me and in several other parts of Baghdad, going on for a couple of hours now, ever since people first heard the news, firing into the air. And just behind me, the police chief, the deputy interior minister, showed up just a short while ago, as well as people carrying banners saying congratulations to all Iraqis. It is a truly amazing thing, that photograph that was shown, a vision of Saddam Hussein most Iraqis would never have dreamed that they would see. Aaron?
Jane, a couple of questions. First, quickly, how did most Iraqis find out about this? On the radio?
Either on the radio or on television. As we keep pointing out, this is a new Iraq, and people now can go out and buy satellite dishes if they want to. That presumes, of course, that they have money and that they have electricity, which isn't always the case. There are citywide power shortages here, but a lot of them did hear about it through television, and they watch a lot of television here. Aaron?
Now, as someone who, on our staff at least, is more familiar with not just the country, but the people in Iraq, give me a sense of how they will see that picture of this haggard former dictator with the beard, disheveled, looking old, tired, and clearly in custody, hardly the man who would swagger about in fancy suits, a gun in the air. This is not the Saddam they know at all.
There were absolute gasps when that picture was shown of all the things that Iraqis never would have expected in their lifetimes to see over the past year. It's safe to say that they would never have expected to see a Saddam Hussein with a tongue depressor being put in his mouth by a U.S. soldier. And the rest of it, the fact that he was found underground, everything that reduces this man who tried to get across and maintain this image that he was monumental, larger than life, being reduced to just an ordinary man hiding underground. It's an absolute shock for Iraqis. Aaron?
I can't imagine, none of us I think can, who haven't lived under it, what that picture must look like to the people of Iraq. Here's this guy who ruled the country in the most violent of ways at times. Whatever your feelings about the war aren't important in all of this. This was a bad man and an American doctor going through his hair looking for lice, which is how that looked to me. I mean, it doesn't get perhaps more degrading than that. Are you nervous today, in a journalistic sense, are you nervous today that there will be attempts to retaliate against Americans?
There will be, but there probably would have been anyway, Aaron. This whole post-war era has unleashed so many things that never existed before. And one of the things that it's really unleashed is a set of forces, organizations, perhaps individuals, who are united in their hatred of Americans. And that doesn't have a lot to do with Saddam, except for the fact that his removal has provided them, in some sense, the opportunity to come here and launch these attacks.
that the U.S. was going to win this battle. They had given up hope that Saddam Hussein would ever be captured or killed, and that, in fact, would return to power. This puts an end to that speculation. It should improve the situation on the ground, according to U.S. officials, who think that now, even though their human intelligence had been improving, that they will now be flooded with intelligence from Iraqis who realize that Saddam Hussein is now gone. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC Jim Miklaszewski. A very good concluding point there. Having been in Baghdad in Iraq before and after the war, it's hard to describe really the depth of the physical and psychological paranoia and fear of the Iraqi people of Saddam Hussein. I remember interviewing a man who was running a food bank, and this had all been cleared by the government before the war. He was so terrified of saying even the wrong syllable that he simply was incoherent and could not get through the interview because Saddam Hussein was still in power at that time. And even though they were encouraging him to talk to me, he didn't want to do that because he feared for his own life and he feared for the life of his family. And then after the war, when Saddam Hussein was on the run, when many American administration officials thought that they'd be welcomed with open arms and that there would be great celebrations and people would go back to their jobs, that fear continued because he was still out there, and they worried that the United States would leave and that he would return to power, or that we would have something like we did immediately after Operation Desert Storm, in which we encouraged an uprising against Saddam Hussein. And of course, he had a bloody counterattack in the south. He decimated the Shiite population there. He drained the swamps in the south and drove many Shiites into exile and killed an untold number more. We'll have continuing coverage of the capture of Saddam Hussein. I'll be back in a moment with General Monty Miggs, who led American occupation forces in Bosnia. His take from a military point of view on what next.
Like Uday and Qusay, but no, he's been captured. He looks a disheveled, depressed, out of touch old man. One can almost feel sorry for him. I don't. He is a ghastly person, and what happens now, I think, is terribly important, not only for Iraq, but also for the United States in Iraq and in the world. This is a man who's going to have to be put on trial, and this is a great opportunity for the Americans, if possible, to get it right.
It's coming up.
Mr. Berger, good morning to you.
Good morning, Leslie.
The U.S. certainly has been wanting to push things into an Iraqi government, into Iraqi hands. Will there be some reluctance, do you think, to turn Saddam Hussein over to any Iraqi tribunal just yet?
Well, I think in the short term, we're going to want to interrogate Saddam Hussein. We're going to want to get as much information as we possibly can from him. But I think ultimately it would be I think very important to have an Iraqi tribunal in which the Iraqi people come to grips with the brutality of this man for 35 years.
Is there an opening here to kind of restart the whole coalition notion of this war, to try and bring allies a bit closer together?
Well, I think to the extent that this demoralizes the opposition to our forces, disorients them, perhaps dries up some of their money, and the situation becomes somewhat more secure, I think it becomes easier for us to attract additional forces and additional allies into the process.
Well, you've certainly...
Success by mastering the psychology of trading.
Capture validate the direction the White House has taken?
Well, I think whether you were for or against this enterprise, the way it was conducted, we've all been deeply committed to the success of a peace operation here, the reconstitution of Iraq, the building of a democracy. Today is a very big step in that direction.
As you know, weapons of mass destruction dominated the conversation leading into this war. With Saddam Hussein in custody, does that ramp up the pressure to get a final resolution to the question, were there or were there not banned weapons in Iraq?
Well, it's an interesting question, Lester. You know, Saddam was not known as a detail-oriented leader. On the other hand, one of the big questions has been, if in fact he destroyed his weapons of mass destruction, why didn't he tell the world about that and try to head off the war that deposed him? And those are kinds of questions that we're going to be asking Saddam. Whether he's going to be providing answers remains to be seen. But I think there's a great deal of information, obviously, that he can provide us.
Well, as you know, the next conversation is going to be about the political impact of this, so I might as well start that conversation right now. What will be the political impact as we are now ramping into an election year?
Well, I don't think we look at today developments of the last 24 hours as Democrats or Republicans. I think we look at them as Americans. This is a great day for the United States. It's a great day for Iraq. It's an important day for beginning to turn the corner on reconstituting Iraq in a more peaceful way and a more secure way, and the politics will sort themselves out.
And do you think, as we watch these pictures of celebrations in Iraq, that the Iraqi people will now be pushing even harder for the end of the occupation? Will this, I guess, speed up in their minds the timetable for true Iraqi governance?
Well, I think there's another element here, Lester. I think that a lot of Iraqis, particularly Sunnis, have been very hesitant to cooperate with us because they've been very fearful that we would leave before Saddam Hussein would be captured. And I think they've held back. I think the real thing to watch now over the next days and weeks is whether or not Iraqis step forward now more vigorously to turn over other insurgents, other guerrillas, whether this emboldens them now to really clean up the mess and turn the corner.
But what I have to say is what people do not look at, they look at Saddam Hussein thinking that this is the real Saddam Hussein. This is not the real Saddam Hussein. I'm not saying for sure because I'm not in the military, but it's kind of funny. This is like a political issue. All of a sudden, this may come out of nowhere, and they sit there and have him on tape, and they just showing how his face and everything, saying like, well, we got him, but they have not sit there and say we did DNA. They have not sit there and came out and let this man be brought in front of us, in front of American people to see, and that he's in shackles and handcuffs. If this is the man, this is not the man. And another thing I have to sit there and say is that the people that sit up here and call and say like, yes, I'm for Bush. Bush did this. Bush has not did anything. I support my troops. My troops did anything, but I'm not backing Bush for anything. And another thing I'm getting mad about is that, okay, they sit up there and they keep on talking about we went over there for weapons of mass destruction, but they have not let the Iraqis sit there and take over. That's what.
In terms of the Iraqi people now, has there been doubt of the stick-to-itness of the U.S. forces and whether, in fact, they were operating in the best interest of the Iraqi people? And perhaps are those doubts now erased?
I think this is a big boost for the credibility of the American military. I think they've done a great job. But for most Iraqis, they've seen less security. They've seen their looting. They've seen
that frankly aren't going to go away because they have everything to lose by having a democratic Iraq. So they're going to stay, which is why General Sanchez kind of laughed at the reporter. Hell no, we're not going home. Our job has just begun. We're not leaving until we have a stable and secure environment. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
And I guess if you can put them out in front of it, as Ambassador Ginsburg was saying, if you can put the Iraqis in front of what happens here forward, that sends a message that's good for the Al Jazeera network and good for the region.
Great point, Shepard. I'll tell you what, the month that I was there, I watched a lot of Arabic TV. Now, I don't speak any Arabic, but images send a lot of messages. And we need a good PR campaign in the Middle East. And I would tell you, Shepard, this is it. This is the beginning of it. So at this point, we have got to do what the ambassador said, put an Arab face on this campaign, continue to get the Iraqis more involved. We've seen some good progress here in the past month with building paramilitary forces. So this is a great boost of inertia.
For viewers who may just be joining us now, approaching 8:30 on the East Coast, 5:30 on the West Coast, Saddam Hussein's been captured. He was found at the bottom of a hole, barely big enough for himself. The pictures tell the story here. Ambassador Ginsburg, these pictures do not tell the story of a man who was running things. Somebody's running things.
Absolutely, Shep. And remember, as you well know, the ace of spades, he may be the ace of spades, but in a deck of cards, the most important number two that has not been captured has been probably the man who's been responsible for the orchestrating the insurgency, General Aduri. That was the former head of Iraqi intelligence. We've apprehended his family a couple of weeks ago. But General Aduri is the man who ultimately controls the money, probably is sending the signals, was getting his marching orders from Saddam or from having worked this out in a plan ahead of time. So we have got to continue to see whether or not his apprehension will lead in effect to the accelerated capture, or if need the surrender of the rest of the deck of cards.
Brett Baer's been working his sources at the Pentagon and has some new information for us. Brett, it happens to be in Chicago today. Brett, what do you know?
Hi, Shep. Yeah, we talked to sources close to Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who got word yesterday afternoon Eastern time, about midday, about 12 noon, that the operation was underway. He soon figured out from U.S. commanders that it was believed to be a success. At that point, he called President Bush at Camp David, telling him that it is believed that Saddam Hussein is in custody. Confirmation came about 5 hours after that. We are told that Secretary Rumsfeld is going to release a statement here in the next few minutes, which essentially will commend the operation not only for the 4th Infantry Division and the Special Operations Forces involved in the operation, but specifically the intelligence community that developed this intelligence. We are hearing more specifics about the intelligence. We are told it is a mix of intelligence, both human intelligence from interrogations, from people who were recently captured, tied to the former regime. They were cooperative in interrogations that led them specifically to this town about 8 miles south of Tikrit. Al-Dawar is the name of the town where they raided this farmhouse. It's also a combination of local tips they've been getting. There's been a spike, according to U.S. commanders, of local intelligence. They weren't sure the quality of the intelligence. They knew they were getting more of it. We are told that this particular intel was a mix of intelligence, both human intelligence and special intelligence, as well as local tips on the ground. What that means is that the intelligence community acted quickly on some actionable intel. Within about an hour and a half, they mobilized troops. 600 U.S. soldiers from the 1st Brigade Combat Team of the 4th Infantry Division surrounded this town south of Tikrit. Then the Special Ops Team, called Task Force 21, which is made up of Special Forces soldiers as well as U.S. intelligence officers, moved in and raided this farmhouse. They had 2 points there called Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. Those are the targets. They moved in, did not find Saddam Hussein there, and then they found this small hole, as you've been talking about. A spider hole is what they called it, about 6 to 7 feet deep in there, just enough room for Saddam Hussein. There was an exhaust pipe, a fan so he could breathe, essentially a hiding space. And after that, they pulled him out without resistance. Not one single shot fired in this operation called Red Dawn. Shep.
Brett, thanks. I want to get to Iraq now, where the Interior Minister of Iraq is with us. Hamed Kadir Ibrahim is joining us live now. Sir, your reaction first off.
Yes. We caught that criminal with the Iraqi police and coalition forces. They worked together a long time. And for that, I thanked Mr. Bush for the freedom, and Mr. Tony Blair and Bremer and Roosevelt and anyone he worked to that freedom for Iraqi people. And that criminal now is fall down. And we follow also his group, and we catch them soon. And also maybe we can catch Bin Laden and his group, and they must be gone out of Iraq.
How much immediate help will this be to quelling the resistance and slowing down the attacks on the coalition troops?
We work with the coalition forces many times when we attack to the criminal, and especially I do that. And I take the Iraqi police out of Baghdad or inside Baghdad, and we work together. We have information and they have information, and we work 24 hours for that freedom. And that big message for any soldier he did here, because that the message means the freedom is up and Saddam fall down. And I thank anyone he come here to help Iraqi people, because he leave his country and his children to help Iraq for freedom.
Do you believe that the attacks on coalition forces will immediately drop in number as a result of this capture?